Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Brian's Horror Corner. And welcome to this movie review as part of my 31 Horror Movies in May 2022 series. Um, day two, we're going to take a look at the movie Cabin Fever, the original from 2002, Eli Roth's directorial debut. I know there's a few other Cabin Fever films. I think there's a sequel, there's a remake. I haven't seen any of those. We're just going to talk about the 2002 original Eli Roth Cabin Fever. So let's just go ahead and get into it. So this is a movie that I got with a bunch of movies for fairly cheap that I have on DVD. Or I think I only paid a couple bucks for it. So it was a fairly easy pickup in that regard. So we'll just kind of go through the setup, the premise, the cast, and then I'll get into my thoughts and review. This is a movie I saw probably 10 or 15 years ago. It's hard to believe this movie's actually 20 years old this year. That's insanity to me because I can remember when it first came out. And I think I rented it in like '04, '05, something like that when it was fairly new. So, anyway, Cabin Fever is a 2002 American horror comedy film. I would call it more of a body horror film or infection film, virus film, but co-written and directed by Eli Roth in his directorial debut, as I mentioned. The story follows a group of college graduates who rent a cabin in the woods and begin to fall victim to a flesh-eating virus. The inspiration of the film's story came from a real-life experience during a trip to Iceland when Roth developed a skin infection. So we start with Henry, who's a hermit walking in the woods, encounters his dog, who has died of a blood infection and soon becomes infected himself from contact with his dog's blood. Meanwhile, college students Jeff, Marcy, Paul, Karen, and Bert take a vacation to a remote cabin to celebrate spring break. Bert leaves to shoot squirrels, but shoots the now disfigured and bloody Henry. Despite Henry's plea, Bert flees and remains silent about the incident. The group gathers around the campfire that night, where they are joined by a friendly drifter named Grim, who's actually played by Eli Roth, and his pet dog, Dr. Mambo. When it rains, Grim leaves with his dog to pack up his belongings. When the friends wait for Grim indoors, Henry returns, begging for help. When Bert shuts the door on the sick hermit, he tries stealing the group's car while vomiting blood all over it. So yeah, that's sort of the setup and the premise of the film. Once again, spoiler-free review here, as it will be with all of these movies for the month of May here this series. Um, Cast wise, of course, we have Ryder Strong as Paul. Of course, most people will know Ryder Strong as Sean Hunter from Boy Meets World, the popular 90s TV show. Jordan Ladd as Karen, James DeBello as Bert, Serena Vincent as Marcy, Joey Kern as Jeff, Ari Verveen as Henry the Hermit, um, Joepsy Andrews as Deputy Winston, and Eli Roth as Justin slash Grimm. So yeah, that's the cast for Cabin Fever. Now I'll just kind of give you my thoughts, pros and cons as I see this movie. So Cabin Fever is an interesting movie. As I said, I've seen it a few times, but it's probably been 10 or 12 years since the last time I saw it. The first thing I have to talk about is it has really good practical effects, especially makeup effects, as it relates especially to those that end up developing and having the flesh eating virus within the movie. It's very creepy looking, very effective looking. It's not CGI, it's not over the top. It actually looks like what you might actually see from a flesh eating virus. There's especially one scene I think towards the middle to the end of the movie where Jordan Ladd's character Karen is revealed in this shed that the friends put her in once they realize she's been infected, and one of the characters turns her over and you can basically see like her teeth. It's just a really effective and horrifying scene that really stands out in this movie. So yeah, practical and makeup effects are really good in this movie. Um, I think the setting of the movie's very good. I mean, I know we've had horror movies in the woods before. Evil Dead comes to mind, the original. Cabin in the Woods, obviously. Been a bunch of them, but for this movie, I think it's a really effective setting within the woods because of this flesh-eating virus that's spreading like wildfire, basically. It's also outside of this like hillbilly town slash area where people aren't very helpful unless it benefits themselves or goes against themselves. They don't have much access to hospitals or a lot of help when things really go sour, which ultimately makes it more frightening, the setting more frightening and more claustrophobic as well with what's going on. Um, the movie, I don't. I'm going to talk a lot about the tone of the movie, of both a pro and a con. From the pro standpoint, I think the tone of the movie's good in terms of the atmosphere and the sense of dread that it has, especially the second half of the movie. Once things really, once the shit really hits the fan, so to speak. There's definitely a sense of being trapped with the disease spreading and spreading around everybody. Very effectively unsettling. Once you get into the middle of the second act of this movie. So from that standpoint, I thought the tone of the movie was good. Um, Effectively revealing scenes within the movie when in terms of who has the disease and the discovery of who has the disease. There's two scenes that always stand out to me. One of them, of course, you can't talk about this movie and not talk about the shaving scene towards the end of the movie, the third act of the movie. I think it's Marcy's character played by Serena Vincent. Basically, a scene after her and another character get it on spontaneously. She's taking a bath and starts shaving her legs. And yeah, I'm not going to say much more than that, but let's just say if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. That's a very unsettling and effective scene in terms of reveal. And then also the scene that I'm just going to go ahead and call the "Am I in the right area?" scene when Ryder Strong's character and Jordan Ladd's character are laying down in bed together. Um, that's really the first moment where the shit hits the fan when it comes to this disease among this group of friends anyway. To know that they're kind of that the infection is broken into their group, so to speak. So yeah, very effective scenes in terms of the reveals there. Um, I also give this movie credit, and I didn't really realize it the first few times I watched it until this most recent watch for this review, but it has an interesting aspect of horror beyond just the virus, the flesh eating virus, which is already horrific enough. But I think it's the fact that, and I don't know why I didn't pick up on this before, but how people turn on each other so quickly. Once they realize that somebody might be infected, they can't get away from them fast enough. You know, there's examples of this throughout the movie with putting one of their friends in a shed when they become infected. One of the characters basically just leaving everybody high and dry and going to do his own thing to avoid getting the infection. It just kind of goes on and on. And even some of the townsfolk they try to be helpful until somebody close to them ends up becoming possibly infected. They just all turn on each other so quickly, and it's definitely like a horrifying part of this movie, and horrifying in general, the way that you can be friends or really close to each other, but once there's a potential of self-infliction that it's too close to home, then it's like, get away from me. And yeah, it's just I really noticed it this time watching the movie more than any of the other times. It's very effectively done, whether it was intentional or not. I'm assuming it was somewhat intentional to that was part of Eli Roth's a little bit deeper into this movie theme that goes on here. But yeah, that's something I really wanted to bring up that I think is very much a pro in this movie. Um, it also, I think, kind of plays onto maybe some possible social commentary about how when somebody's suspected of being infected or not like us, you know, as a social commentary theme. That really made me think about that, which definitely adds a little bit more to the movie than meets the eye. Adds an interesting element of horror to the movie. It's a pretty well shot and directed movie, especially for being a first time director like Eli Roth was when he did this movie. This was his first movie. I think he had a vision that he executed pretty well in this movie. It also gives you a feeling like you're in good hands, kind of like what you mostly get with like a Quentin Tarantino movie or some other directors. That you're in pretty good hands. I think that kind of comes across in the movie. I like the ending of the movie as well, where I mean, technically there aren't really any bad guys in this movie, but I mean, the hillbillies and the law enforcement you could kind of view them as bad guys because these kids that came into the woods innocently enough end up becoming infected, and then they basically are all out to get rid of them to stop this virus from spreading by killing them, basically. And where was I going with this? Oh, my point is that the sort of quote unquote bad guys kind of get theirs in the end without really knowing it, that they're not free of the virus despite what they do. Also, there's an idea that the virus won't be contained to this area that they're all in, which again is a very effective, creepy ending and idea to this movie that this virus is going to end up getting out beyond the woods and beyond the small BFE area. Um, so that was really effective. And I have to say, too, I don't think the acting by the main characters is all that bad. I mean, I'm not saying it's great, but I thought it was fairly serviceable among the five friends in the movie, particularly in the second half of the movie when shit starts going down as it relates to the virus. I've seen a lot worse acting from young actors, so I have to bring that up. I thought they did at least a serviceable job to make the movie somewhat effective. And then finally, you got to talk about the musical score. I thought Eli Roth inserted a very good musical score that really worked for this movie. Kind of a dread-filled score that, throughout the woods that's going on, some different musical tones and that are used throughout the movie. So yeah, musical score is good. So yeah, it's a lot of pros about this movie that make it fairly effective for what it is. So getting into a few cons that I have with the movie, the writing of the characters more than anything, they are pretty cliched characters, pretty typical horror movie young cliched characters, typical and predictable in terms of their reactions and their behaviors on in a movie like this. Not they're not particularly deep or interesting. Most of these characters are pretty paper thin. They try the first third of the movie to try to give you a little something with the characters, but it's not very deep. It doesn't really go much below the skin, in my opinion. Now, this movie is pitted to be a horror comedy. If there's comedy in this movie, it's more weird, bizarre comedy than it is like actual laugh out loud comedy. Um, it's just kind of a weird movie, and this is where I'm going to get into the other part of the tone of the movie, where I mentioned in my prose that the tone in terms of the atmosphere and the unsettling atmosphere, as well as the sense of dread, worked. But the other part of it is this movie tries to balance a tone of being comedic or weird, if you will, along with being serious and being a horror movie. And I think Eli Roth misses the mark there a little bit. I think that might have been where his inexperience shows up a little bit more for me with this movie. Never could quite kind of figure out what they ultimately wanted the movie to be, and I don't think the balancing act works all that well. I didn't find myself laughing at any point of this movie. It's more like he put stuff in this movie that's just kind of weird, whether it be with the hillbilly stuff and the pancake kid. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. It's like, what the fuck? And then also you see when Ryder Strong's being taken into the hospital towards the end of this movie, he ends up seeing something which I'm assuming is virus related. He basically sees like this. I don't want to give it away, but you just have to watch the movie when he's looking into one of the operating rooms or one of the hospital rooms. Just some really weird stuff thrown into this movie, and I don't think it works all that well. Um, Another thing that we get, and this is might be more of a personal con for me, just the ineptitude and the incompetence of law enforcement within movies, which was definitely something that was thrown into these early 2000s horror movies. It's very cliche and typical, and I understand part of it's to drive the horror movie forward. You can't have law enforcement being smart or competent, I guess. I don't know. It's just one of those things that kind of gets old after a while. I think there's a better way to do it. This is of course, this idea is led no better than by Deputy Winston, who's just basically a partying, going, drinking with underage, teenage partying people. Supposed to be this deputy, and he has no competence whatsoever when it comes to law enforcement. So yeah, he's like the poster child for it. Um, this movie, I also think, is a little bit more overtly racist than it needs to be. Now, it's not throughout the whole movie. It's kind of the beginning and the end. There's a couple of words of dialogue and some things said and implied that I don't know. I understand that they're kind of in a hillbilly community, but that's sort of another cliche or another generalization that if you're a bunch of white hillbillies, then you got to be racist. I understand it was over 20 years ago. It wouldn't fly now, but I just thought that was unnecessary. That really didn't bring anything to the film. It makes you kind of uncomfortable. Some of the dialogue is rough and not well executed either, particularly in the first act of the film when they're trying to set things up for character development, story development. I thought that landed pretty flat. And it also does take it does take a while, at least to the second act, to get to any horror in the movie, really. It's all set up before that, which again, that might be more of a con for other people that I'm just bringing up. I didn't mind it that much. I've seen worse as far as slow burns go, but just keep that in mind. It takes time to set up the characters and the relationships, and I don't think it's overly effective or necessarily needed in some aspects as well. So yeah, those are my thoughts on this movie, Cabin Fever, the original from 2002. Overall, I think this is a pretty good horror movie for what it is. A pretty good directorial debut for Eli Roth. He's obviously known at this point more for Hostel and Hostel 2, but definitely the first Hostel. But this one is more of a cult following status. Cabin Fever from 2002. I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. I don't think it's a great horror movie, but I think for what it is, it's unique enough and different enough that it's still worth a watch. It's still a good movie to have in my collection and your collection, as long as you don't pay more than $10 for it, I would say. But yeah, I enjoy Cabin Fever for what it is, especially as we're getting into spring and summer here. I think it's a pretty good time of the year to watch it. So that's my review for Cabin Fever on this day two for my 31 horror movies of May 2022 series. Go ahead and comment down below. Tell me what you guys think of Cabin Fever. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Why or why not? Please like this video and hit the little notification bell below so you don't miss any of my upcoming horror reviews for this series. And please subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my upcoming horror content for the rest of the summer, as we're getting into the summer here and hopefully nicer weather for where I am anyway. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this movie review. Thanks for checking it out and stay scared. Bye.